Lisa Bonet stayed silent for years. While fans admired the fairy tale, her closest friends saw something else. They warned her. They told her what no one else dared to say out loud. And now, after the divorce, after the cameras, after the dust has settled, Lisa's finally admitting it. They were right. The man the world thought was her soulmate, he may have loved her deeply, but he never truly understood her. And by the time Jason Momoa realized what he had lost, Lisa was already gone. This wasn't about scandal. It was about survival. And Lisa Bonet, she chose peace over pretending. And now, the truth she tried to bury for years is finally rising to the surface. To everyone watching from the outside, Lisa Bonet and Jason Momoa looked like a modern love story that defied Hollywood odds. They were soulful, free-spirited, effortlessly magnetic. He, the rising star with wild ambition. She, the mysterious icon who had long rejected the spotlight in favor of stillness and truth. But not everyone believed the fairy tale. In fact, the people who knew Lisa best, the ones who had walked beside her through heartbreak, motherhood, and the highs and lows of fame, they saw something deeper, something off. And they weren't afraid to say it. They warned her, not out of jealousy, not out of cynicism, but because they could feel it, the imbalance, the drift, the quiet surrender of a woman who had once been so unapologetically herself. Lisa had already lived a full life by the time she met Jason. She had loved deeply with Lenny Kravitz. She had raised a daughter. She had found her rhythm. Off the grid, grounded in nature, surrounded by spiritual energy instead of flashing lights. So when Jason entered her world, younger, louder, fueled by dreams of stardom, her friends hesitated. Yes, he adored her. Yes, his love was real. But was it the kind of love that saw her? That held space for her without consuming her? One friend, close to Lisa since her earliest acting days, later confided. He loved the idea of her. Who wouldn't? But Lisa needs quiet. She needs depth. And Jason, he was chasing something else. They watched her adjust. First, it was small things. Skipping events. Staying in the background. Speaking less. Appearing less. But over time, those small choices began to erase pieces of her. And those same friends who had celebrated her relationship in the beginning started to worry. They saw her light dimming, not because Jason tried to dim it, but because she was shrinking to keep the peace. One former colleague of Lisa's once put it bluntly, Jason filled every room. Lisa used to fill every space without saying a word. And one day, it felt like she wasn't in the room at all. Still, she said nothing. Lisa Bonet didn't fight back. She didn't push away. She believed in letting love grow. But what she didn't know yet was that love can't grow in shadows. And her friends knew it long before she did. For a long time, Lisa believed she could make it work. She thought if she held steady, if she stayed grounded, Jason would eventually slow down. That the chaos of fame would pass, and they'd settle into something deeper. But instead, he just kept climbing. One blockbuster after another. Press tours, magazine covers, brand deals, red carpets, appearances. The louder his life got, the quieter Lisa became. And not in a peaceful way, in a lonely way. While Jason was on set, surrounded by castmates and camera crews, Lisa was back home in the hills, meditating, reading, cooking, parenting, being still. Not because she was being left out, but because she no longer fit in. Jason didn't do anything wrong. But as he leaned further into the persona the world loved, Lisa was left trying to remember who she used to be. The phone calls grew shorter, the reunions more distant, and eventually, the woman who had once inspired him began to feel like a stranger in her own marriage. One close family friend later said, she was holding up the roof while he was building towers somewhere else. Lisa never demanded attention, but she needed presence. Not physical presence, but emotional anchoring. And that was the one thing Jason couldn't give her. The drift didn't happen overnight. It happened in the silence. The unreturned texts, the canceled plans, the nights apart that turned into weeks. And all the while, Lisa was internalizing it. Because Lisa Bonet doesn't explode. She doesn't perform grief. She retreats. And her friends knew that all too well. They saw the same pattern they had seen before in her split from Lenny. The long, slow burn of a woman holding everything together until she simply can't anymore. But this time it felt different. This time, Lisa wasn't just mourning a relationship. She was mourning herself. She had bent so far to support Jason's rising sun that she forgot her own sky existed. And when she tried to speak, gently, quietly, truthfully, Jason couldn't hear her through the noise of his own life. Insiders say that Lisa had moments of hope, that she believed things could realign. But hope can't carry a marriage. Not when one partner is being pulled by the current of celebrity, and the other is anchoring themselves to sacred ground. And so, she began to disappear. Not in anger, not out of spite, but because she was trying to find herself again. She stopped showing up, stopped waiting for his calls, stopped asking to be understood. And when her friends finally sat with her, really sat with her, they could feel it. Something was broken, not just between them, inside her. And that's when she finally said the words that no one ever expected to hear from Lisa Bonet. They were right. It wasn't a confession. It was a release, a quiet acknowledgement that the woman who once stood so firmly in her own truth had ignored her intuition for too long. Because love isn't always enough. Not when it costs you yourself. It didn't happen with a fight. There wasn't some explosive argument or betrayal that shattered the relationship. The final crack came in a moment so quiet, it would have gone unnoticed if Lisa Bonet hadn't been paying attention to what her soul was whispering. One source close to the couple described it as a turning point. A moment where Lisa realized she wasn't just alone in a house. She was alone in a partnership. Jason had just wrapped another film, something huge, something loud. He returned home, full of stories and energy and people praising him from every direction. But he didn't ask her how she was. He didn't even notice the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes had lost their spark. And Lisa, tired, silent, and emotionally spent, simply nodded, smiled, and went to bed. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel married. She felt like a witness in someone else's life. She knew then, it was over. Not in the legal sense, not in the way tabloids would later describe it, but emotionally, spiritually, she had already let go. What hurt more than the distance was the realization that Jason didn't even see it happening. He was too busy chasing the life he'd always wanted. Lisa had supported his dreams, cheered him on, given him space, and now she was disappearing in that same space she helped create. When she finally spoke to a friend, someone who had warned her years ago, they said she didn't cry, she didn't yell. She just said, "I think you were right." For words, softly spoken, but heavy with all the weight she'd been carrying in silence. She hadn't listened when the people closest to her said this path might lead to heartbreak, because she wanted to believe in him, in love, in the idea that someone so different could grow alongside her. But some people aren't meant to meet us in the quiet. They're meant to pass through our story and teach us who we are when we forget. And that's exactly what Jason Momoa did. When Lisa and Jason publicly announced their split, fans were stunned. How could a couple that waited 16 years to get married end it all so quickly? But to those who truly knew Lisa Bonet, there was no shock, no confusion, only quiet understanding. Lisa had resisted marriage for a reason. She had always said marriage felt like a spiritual contract, not a legal one. She didn't believe in tying herself down unless the energy was aligned. So when she finally said yes to Jason in 2017, after nearly 2 decades of partnership, it was never about the dress or the party. It was about honoring the life they had built. But when that life stopped reflecting who she was, the paper didn't mean a thing. The real ceremony had ended long before the divorce was signed. Insiders say the final months were respectful. No screaming, no betrayal, just 2 people who had quietly outgrown each other. But while Jason grieved publicly, Lisa retreated inward, protective of her peace. She didn't do interviews. She didn't seek sympathy. She didn't post cryptic captions or chase narratives. Because for Lisa, the breakup wasn't an event. It was a return. One close friend described it perfectly. She didn't leave Jason. She came back to herself. And that, more than anything, explains the silence. It wasn't indifference. It was healing. For Jason, the divorce seemed sudden. But for Lisa, it had already happened months, maybe years, before the world even noticed. She had tried to make it work. She had stayed for the children, for the memories, for the hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd realign. But love without presence becomes performance. And Lisa Bonet has never been interested in pretending. So she stepped back, not to hurt Jason, but to protect herself. Because the woman who once stood in front of the world as the wild, mystical force that captivated millions had been slowly fading into someone she no longer recognized. And her friends, the very ones who had warned her long ago, didn't say, "I told you so." They simply showed up. They held space. They watched her rise. Lisa never needed to be rescued. She just needed to be reminded that her peace was never meant to be sacrificed for anyone else's spotlight. After the breakup, Lisa Bonet didn't reappear in the way most celebrities do. There were no post-divorce makeovers, no headlines about new lovers or flashy statements. She simply existed, and if you were paying attention, that was the most powerful statement of all. In the rare photos that surfaced, she looked lighter, free in a way that words couldn't explain. Not because she was happy the marriage ended, but because she had finally stopped negotiating her worth. Those who truly know Lisa say she returned to her roots. More time in nature, more time with her children, more time with herself. The woman who once sacrificed her silence to keep the peace in a noisy partnership had found strength in solitude again. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need validation. She needed clarity. And now she had it. Lisa's return wasn't loud because it didn't need to be. When a woman reclaims her power, the world doesn't always notice. But the people who once underestimated her, they feel it. Friends say she's smiling again. Not the kind of smile you fake for the cameras, but the kind that comes from knowing you made the hardest choice for the right reasons. The kind that comes when your soul is finally back in alignment. And maybe that's the greatest irony of it all. The Lisa Bonet the world was once obsessed with, the enigma, the muse, the myth, was never lost. She just stopped dimming herself for a man who never realized how much light she was giving him. Jason Momoa has spoken with deep respect about Lisa since the split. He's acknowledged the heartbreak, the growth, the lessons, but what he hasn't said publicly is what he carries privately. Because losing someone like Lisa Bonet isn't something you recover from overnight. She believed in him before the world did. She stood beside him when he was still fighting for roles, still dreaming big. And now that the world finally sees him, he's seeing her in a way he never did before. But it's too late. Not because Lisa hates him, not because she's moved on with someone else, but because she's moved on with herself. And when a woman like Lisa Bonet chooses to walk away, she doesn't look back. Her friends were right. She stayed too long. But in the end, she found the strength to listen. Not to them, not to Jason, but to the voice inside her that had been whispering the truth all along. For more of the latest news, check out this video.